Today's Milwaukee VA Medical Center is located on the grounds of Milwaukee Soldiers' Home. Here to tell the legacy, which dates back to the Civil War, is author Patricia Lynch. She's my special guest next on I Remember. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight is Patricia Lynch. In 2003, she co-founded the West Side Soldiers Aid Society. It was a rebirth of a Milwaukee women's organization formed during the Civil War to provide care for veterans. In the 1860s, their fundraising efforts helped support the establishment of a national soldiers' home. Now Lynch shares the legacy of that historic landmark in her book, Milwaukee's Soldiers' Home. Take a look.
In 1867, 2 years after President Lincoln signed legislation to benefit Union soldiers, the northwestern branch of the National Asylum for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers opened on the western edge of Milwaukee. Soldiers in need first resided in this building, later used as a hospital. The Victorian Gothic main building was dedicated in 1869. The acreage at the Soldiers' Home included a farmhouse and barns and beautiful flower gardens. A tranquil setting that provided respite to the residents, there were also several lakes on the grounds. Public visitors enjoyed the setting as a popular place for entertainment and patriotic celebrations. The Ward Theater was a place for lectures and entertainment. Many events drew neighbors from surrounding communities. Imagine taking a horse and carriage down roads on the grounds. Later, 2 streetcar routes were available to make a trip from downtown. While it became Wood National Cemetery in 1973, the original Soldiers' Home Cemetery opened on the grounds in 1871. The Civil War veterans at the Soldiers' Home were joined by veterans from other conflicts. After World War I, a tuberculosis hospital was constructed. After World War II, there was additional expansion, along with advancements in medical care. A new medical center was under construction in the 1960s. It is known today as the Clement J. Zablocki VA Medical Center, in honor of the late congressman who was a veterans advocate. In her book, author Patricia Lynch includes numerous historical photographs in her salute to Milwaukee's Soldiers' Home.
I want to start out by reading something to you. This was put in the Milwaukee Sentinel back in somewhere around the 1860s. By the women of the West Side Women's Soldiers Aid Society. And it goes as follows. When the contest for right is over and the thousands of sturdy sons of Wisconsin return from the havoc of battle, maimed, crippled, and helpless for life, a home of magnificent proportions for which we have not marble white enough must be built. This temporary resting place may prove the cornerstone of a permanent home for our battle-scarred heroes for all time to come. What a beautiful...
I can't say any more than that.
Whoa, thank you very much for being with us. No, that is just wonderful. Why were they making that case? First of all, what had they been doing up until that point?
They started with the rest of Milwaukee women responding to the immediate needs of soldiers in 1861.
Okay, 1861, so some had started to come back.
Right, there was the Ladies Association for the Aid of Military Hospitals. But in time, the needs changed. They started providing assistance for soldiers' wives and families who were impoverished because their loved ones were away. But these particular women who lived on the west side of the Milwaukee River began to refocus their efforts to care for those men who were passing through Milwaukee. Either they were coming here to one of Milwaukee's Civil War camps and were in need, or passing through on furlough, or coming back from the battlefield with illness, or just needs for shelter, food.
I read something recently that someone had written talking about the fact that the ones who came back missing limbs were the lucky ones, because the ones that came back carrying disease or infection.
Right. If you look at the records of the men who were finally admitted to the National Home, you'll see wounds that didn't heal, chronic dysentery and diarrhea that debilitated them for the rest of their lives.
Killed probably more people than the bullets during the war. It was awful.
That and then the emotional scars. Didn't really know how to treat that at the time, but those needs were overwhelming.
The original place, we'll call it the original home, was not where it is now.
No, the women were creating a temporary home. It's on Plankington. That was West Water Street, between Wisconsin and Wells. They started with one storefront at 207 West Water and eventually rented 4 or 5 more.
And what did they do there?
They had beautiful living quarters. So they were caring for the sick, feeding the men as they passed through, giving vocational counseling and vocational assistance, bailing the men out of jail. Was not, even the first week they opened, they were bailing members of the 17th Wisconsin out of the city jail.
Nothing has changed over the succeeding 100 years.
And I think their initial efforts convinced them that the state needed to do something permanently. And that was their reason for approaching the state legislature in 1865.
So they were a volunteer organization?
All volunteer. It was a female run operation. There was an advisory.
No wonder it went well.
There was an advisory council of gentlemen who, according to the bylaws, could speak only when asked to speak.
When spoken to.
Right. And I think they're very independent, young.
When you say young, give me an age range.
30.
Really?
That would be the median age for this group.
And why West Side? Why not all Milwaukee, or why not East Side?
The east side of the river was the Wisconsin Soldiers' Aid Society, an officially recognized auxiliary of the United States Sanitary Commission. And they were more connected with Chicago efforts. When Chicago had a fair, Milwaukee would support Chicago's efforts. And Chicago had also wanted a soldiers' home, and the women on the east side of the river were supporting that effort.
Wouldn't you know it?
Yeah, wouldn't you know it?
So then there
was competition at that time.
Those uppity young West Siders, where'd they get the money to do this?
They were prominent young women of Milwaukee. Well, for example, Alexander Mitchell was one of their supporters. And they just threw...
Was his wife involved in this?
She was. Mm-hmm. She was involved in almost every philanthropic effort in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. But they were holding fairs early on, dances, parties. They borrowed Byron Kilbourne's yacht at one time and had a fundraiser on Lake Michigan. The afternoon, they brought some of the patients from the home on the board and had a band and dining.
Were there hospitals prior to this? I just sort of assumed there were, but it's sounding as though there weren't.
There were some early, the Passavant Hospital, which later became, or St. Mary's Hospital, mm-hmm. but not
wow,
not enough.
It was pretty primitive.
It was.
And so they had some had money on their own, some married it, some had fathers and whatever, Alexander Mitchell, and, mm-hmm. and that's pretty much where the money came from.
And they asked for subscriptions from the people of Milwaukee, even $1 a month subscription. They were not shy at all about begging for supplies. And for money.
When did they decide to move? And was it their decision?
It was their decision to have a permanent home rather than this temporary operation.
And probably not down on Plankington and what became Plankington in Wisconsin.
No, after their fundraising flare, their site was on 27th in Wisconsin. And they had already, in 1866, contracted an architect and bought supplies to build a home for Wisconsin soldiers. This is not the national effort.
Nobody was thinking in terms of a national effort at that time.
The businessmen of Milwaukee were thinking in terms of a national effort.
Oh.
There had been legislation in March of 1865 that Lincoln had signed, creating the concept of a national home. But there were some unfortunate clauses in the legislation, 100-member board of managers, so that in a year's time they never had a quorum.
Yeah, that must have been fun.
Finally, in 1866, the federal government started moving and selecting sites. And without the women's knowledge or permission, some of Milwaukee's notables, including George Walker, who was on the national board, mm-hmm. Went to Washington and say, well, we've got a deal for you. These women have $100,000. And if
Did they have $100,000?
That's how much they raised in that one fair.
One fair?
One fair in June, July of 1865.
What did they do at the fair to bring in $100,000? I'm almost afraid to ask.
Selling food, of course, dances, raffles, exhibits of exotic animals, the first public display of art in Milwaukee.
Really? You said exotic animals. What did they have?
Well, Tangle McCracken was a local entrepreneur who mostly sold oysters, but he also collected animals. And
I'm sorry, thought of exotic oysters.
Right. They were called monumentals, so they must have been quite something. But anyway, he had the feature was it was called Tangle's Feature, and it featured Old Abe, the mascot of the 8th Wisconsin. He was in the middle, the real Old Abe.
Really?
In the middle of this exhibit, and he was surrounded by 4 Union General Eagles.
And for the 1 or 2 people out there who don't know who Old Abe was, who was he?
The mascot of the 8th Wisconsin who went with them into battle.
And he was a
American Eagle.
A bald eagle, yeah.
Yes.
And they were the stories that were told during battles. He was tethered, but he would fly up to the end of his tether and scream as eagle screams, whatever eagles scream.
He was the favorite target of the Confederates.
And they never got him.
They never got him.
They always wanted to shoot him because that was on Wisconsin. That was
So
wow.
Before the fair, the ladies had been selling cards with his image, and if you wanted to pay a little bit more, he would autograph it for you.
Huh.
You would throw the card into the cage, and he would peck at it or scratch at it. There's one of these cards in the Veterans Museum.
Wow.
So anything for a buck. You could have his feather if it happened to fall off.
And it raised $100,000. Okay, so I interrupted your story. So these guys, who had very little to do with that, I might add, go down to Washington and say, hey, these women got $100,000. Okay, take the story from there.
When they returned,
what did they want done?
To have a branch of the home was to be established in branches throughout the country.
Okay.
One in Maine, one in Dayton, Ohio, and then of course Milwaukee was up for grabs at that point. When they came back, the women did not agree at all. Just from a standpoint of stewardship, they had raised this money with the understanding that it would be used for Wisconsin Soldiers' Home, and they didn't want to betray their donors. But they were persuaded over time that it would be difficult to sustain their efforts in the long haul. Sure, they can get the home built, but then to keep it operating would be difficult. So we say that they were persuaded to relinquish their project.
Okay, so George Walker and a couple of his cronies got together. I assume they did not take the 27th in Wisconsin.
No.
Okay. Well, what brought them out to Wood? First of all, Wood, Wisconsin probably wasn't called Wood, Wisconsin.
No, not till 1937.
Okay.
But
so this area.
There were some men who had this wonderful land to sell. One of them was John Mitchell, the son of Alexander Mitchell, and his partner Tweedy. And I think the siting of the home was important. They were looking for a beautiful location with excellent airflow that could be developed into this Victorian sanctuary.
It turned out to be very wise because you figure how built up 27th became.
That's right. That's right.
You know, that ended up in the middle of the city, whereas Wood is still its pristine self.
So they handed over the money they had and sold their building materials and the land eventually.
Now, was the land that became Wood donated by these wealthy people?
No, it was not. It was sold by these wealthy people.
Those chintzy guys. I'm beginning to see a plot here.
There is a plot.
Okay, so they had.
But it's really ideal location.
It's perfect.
There were the Milwaukee, Chicago, St. Paul Railroad ran through there. That was necessary for supplying the home, and the lakes and the elevation.
How many lakes were out there?
There were 4, which were considered to be assisted lakes. So they were spring-fed.
Okay.
And they were kind of groomed into these beautiful features.
And what else did it have? Because I said 4 lakes. What would I have seen if I had taken a buggy ride out there?
Just after the development or before?
Before, after, yeah. First of all, rolling hills.
Rolling hills, ravines, a beautiful outlook on the city. But it was developed into this picturesque. Actually, that's the name of the landscape or architectural movement is picturesque. So you take the wild elements and then arrange them in such a way that it's a really healing environment.
It sounds almost like an Olmsted
Yes, yes.
influenced project. You think of Central Park or Lake Park.
That's right, that's right. Actually, it was a chaplain from the Soldiers' Home, Thomas Van Horn, who was the main architect of the...
Oh, really? And so they get government permission, and they actually name one of the 3 homes that's going to be ours, not that East Side Chicago thing that
Right.
those people wanted. And what was the next step then? To start, I assume to start building. They had to get plans.
Right. E. Townsend Mix, noted Milwaukee architect,
yes.
did the plans for the first buildings. In the meantime, they constructed in about 6 weeks a building that would hold the first soldiers who came out in 1867.
Really? 6 weeks?
6 weeks. And that served as a hospital after its time as a residence was done. And then Old Main, which is the huge Victorian building that you can see behind Miller Park, was completed in 1869.
Wow. And now, as this was happening, there were patients coming in.
There were, from all over the country. And this is one of the benefits of the National Home, really, that the men could travel between the branches. Say if you came to Milwaukee and it was a hard winter, you might decide to go to Dayton, Ohio for a time.
Yeah, you didn't have too many choices, Dayton, Ohio, or Maine, so you're
And then eventually they added Hampton, Virginia, which was a
much better
location.
But so they built the first building held, I assume, not too many people.
500, but it was pushed
really?
to 1,000. You know, the influx of soldiers was unanticipated. I think that's what we find in any conflict, especially those who are chronically ill, who could not be integrated back into family life. The government had promised 3 things: pension, preference for government jobs, and free artificial limbs. But none of these could really help men adjust back to civilian life.
And no one had ever heard of post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder.
No.
What else did they? What did they do with people like that? With people who were just they may have been physically pretty well okay, but they couldn't readjust.
Well, there were a couple things. It was called a home, but it really was a military establishment. So they were living a military life from bugle call and cannon blast at 6 a.m. till reveille at night.
Wait, well, let's go. That's an interesting point, and let's go. Okay, now I'm coming in and I'm being admitted. How am I admitted?
Well, the first thing you're going to have to do is take a bath and get clean clothing. It was government.
You could tell that from where you were.
Reconfigured clothing as the Union sack coats with new buttons. And actually, the taking of the bath caused a number of men to walk right out the door.
Seriously?
One said, "I haven't been in water since I fell in the river at Shiloh. I'm leaving."
Wow.
So they would get their government-issued clothing and the rules and regulations, have a complete physical. And then each of the men who lived would be assigned to a company
Just like in
of
the
men
military.
with 100 men with officers chosen from their ranks. And then the day was structured really like as if they were on the battlefield.
Talk about that. You mentioned the bugle call and the cannon going off. So what was my day going to be like? The first day I wake up and I got a cannon going off.
So you'd be quiet while you're getting up. That was one of the rules in the dormitory, that when reveille sounded, you would get up quietly and make your way to the dining hall. Meals were, you had an assigned seat for your entire stay at the home. There was sick call shortly after that.
You're already in a hospital. What do you need sick call for?
For those minor complaints
Yeah.
that might need some soothing whiskey or something like that.
Ooh.
Then you had your assigned labor.
Oh, really?
There was inspection from time to time. There was leisure time in the afternoon, and then reveille and taps at the conclusion of the day.
Mm-hmm. So I got 3 meals. I got bedding. I got clothing. After that initial bath, was I still expected to take one
Once a week.
Once a week, whether I needed it or not.
And they were issued tickets that were turned in to the person who was supervising the bath. And when you look at the discipline book from the later part of the century, there are still fines for not bathing.
Seriously? So what sort of discipline did they have?
There was a military court to handle the offenses against the good and order of the home. Anything from going AWOL, leaving the grounds without permission. Of course, drunkenness was a major concern. And then there are miscellaneous things like stealing a spoon or selling government-issued clothing downtown. So
I could leave
you could leave
the home, the grounds.
And certainly, you know, that was common, the saloon culture that grew up on the north and south of the home on Wisconsin Avenue and National.
Did that ever get to be a problem?
It was a problem. It was. If you talk about post-traumatic stress and other issues, that was, you know, the way of self-medicating. The problem with it is that the saloons were serving bad liquor, and that everyone pretty much figured out when the government pension checks would come in. So these men going to the saloons would often be mugged or
Really?
Have accidents on their way home. But the VA, or the Soldiers' Home in its wisdom, created its own canteen on the grounds in 1880, where beer was sold for $5 a glass. $5. 5 cents. 5 cents a glass. 5 cents a glass.
Baseball game going on.
They went through 2 to 10 barrels a day.
Really?
And it just really did help. This was under the leadership of Cornelius Wheeler, who was the governor of the home, himself an Iron Brigade veteran, who thought this would be a safer way to moderate.
So you keep it on the. Now, I remember as a little kid going out like 4th of July or something and going out to Wood, and it was kind of a neat place to go. There were your picnics and all sorts of stuff.
From the earliest days,
Really?
Memorial Day and the 4th of July were really the highlights. Especially 4th of July was probably one of the best celebrations in Milwaukee. You read about Chinese lanterns strung all over the grounds and magnificent fireworks. The home had its own band.
Really?
Made up of members and professional musicians who performed almost every day.
Now, did some of these veterans have children, and were children part of the program?
No.
No.
No. I think it was originally envisioned that spouses and children could live on the grounds, but it just was not possible.
So you didn't.
And it wasn't until some of these men died that the leadership found out that they had families.
Really? Wow.
Well, this was a difficult transition for a lot of them.
But you could go out and picnic on the grounds.
You could, although there were signs everywhere that let you know that this was not a public park, and that you shouldn't be driving your teams of horses past the band
When it's playing.
Right. Right.
Wasn't there? We were talking about the lakes before, and wasn't one of them tragically named Suicide Lake? The Suicide Pond, was it?
Yeah, not only the men on the home, but other Union veterans who were drawn to the home. That's really a sad chapter. I've just recently been transcribing death records, and almost every year has 5 or 6 suicides.
We talked about the grounds, and you actually, you personally, but your organization actually sells a beautiful picture, an overview of that.
It does. We've learned so much from that lithograph. Just recently, in doing the book, we had a mystery about the first firehouse, and we're able to study the lithograph and see the first firehouse next to Lake Hinks, one of the spring-fed lakes. The one lake that remains is listed on the lithograph as Ice Lake, so they're actually harvesting ice from that lake.
And people can buy that. How do they do it?
Well, they could find the West Side Soldiers Aid Society online and order it through us.
Yes, but it's a wonderful thing because it's just gorgeous. How did you get involved in all this?
Oh, I grew up at with my grandfather at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home in Massachusetts, so I was always kind of intrigued by this notion of soldiers' homes. And when I came to school at Marquette, I had my soon-to-be husband drive me around the grounds, and I was just entranced by it. And it was also one of the few places that I could find Memorial Day celebrations similar to the ones I remembered from New England, where it really is the focus of the community for that day.
One of the things I remember was so clearly was when we built County Stadium. I don't know whether they took some land from Wood, but anyway, they had bleachers set up so the veterans could sit up there and watch the games free.
Almost every time I speak, I've met somebody who's been up on that hill and remembers those bleachers. Yeah, unfortunately, the scoreboard in right field kind of blocked their view, but the Brewers are still really generous with tickets for VA patients, and last year supported efforts to raise money for Fisher House on the grounds.
And talk we have a minute left, so I just talk very briefly about what Fisher House is.
This is an amazing concept to be able to support patients who are receiving long-term care, especially those in spinal cord injury. The easiest way to say it is a Ronald McDonald House for families and those who are supporting patients. And this will be, ground will be broken in September. Right now there are 60 Fisher Houses around the United States and around the world. So we're just really thrilled to have that there. And the Brewers, once again this year, will be supporting.
That's going to be a wonderful, wonderful facility.
It is.
And we should mention that our Soldiers Home, I refer to it as ours, is really a mecca for spinal cord injury. It's one of the specialties.
It is. They have patients from as far away as Hawaii coming for treatment there.
It's just phenomenal. And so is this book, by the way. Milwaukee's Soldiers Home is the name of it. It's got great text. It's got, of course, fabulous pictures. And you will find more out about the Soldiers Home than you ever dreamed you didn't know. And I thought I knew something about it until I started reading this. And it's just phenomenal. And we should mention that you co-founded a resurrected group. You were not the original.
Active, right. And
yes.
we are an active Soldiers Aid Society today.
Yes, you weren't there in 1861.
I feel like I was.
Patricia Lentz, thank you very much for being with us. This is such a pleasure, and it's a great, great story. Thank you for being with us. Hope we'll see you next time as we continue to remember. Thank you.